Hey friends, welcome back to the Collective's Conversations. We're having conversations at the intersection of faith and life. Wherever you're listening, just go ahead and hit that subscribe or follow button to make sure you don't miss a single episode. And while you're at it, give us a review or rating that helps these conversations reach other great listeners. Today on the show, we've got Kayty Helgerson from Gather Intentional Living. We talk charcuterie, among other things, but mostly we talk about this idea of biblical gathering and biblical hospitality. One of our favorite things to do at our house is host and have people and gather together. So without delay, let's get to our conversation with Kayty. Friends, welcome back to the Collective's Conversation, where we're having conversations at the intersection of faith and life. I've got Kayty Helgerson from Gather Intentional Living. Kayty and her husband Colby are the founders of Gather Intentional Living. They're helping equip and inspire everyday hosts through food, design, and relationship. And I love the idea of gathering. Kayty, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I got to ask, you sort of got big on socials through charcuterie, and I love charcuterie. So I think we've got commonality there. So right off the bat, what is your preferred charcuterie choice? Are you like classic cheese and crackers? Are you doing like the s'more charcuterie? What's your go-to?
So this answer is always funny to people. Twofold. They're both equally as funny. The first one is I'm lactose intolerant, so I can't even enjoy the cheese, which is funny. But there's lots of dairy-free cheeses that I've been loving. The second is I have made hundreds of charcuterie at this point, and so I'll be honest, it's lost its flair a little bit for me.
Okay.
Yeah, so I love the art of it. I don't eat it as much these days, but an Italian antipasto is the most nostalgic for me. It reminds me of my grandpa. So anything kind of like marinated Italian.
Marinated Italian. Gotcha. So you have an Italian background then?
Yes, very strong.
Very strong. Very cool. And so in your interesting story, which I've got to read part of it from your website, is that you and Colby actually began as sort of missionaries of sorts. You traveled to Indonesia to combat human trafficking. So what sort of led a couple of college students full of zeal to go, let's go tackle that world issue?
Wow. So I know all those little countries get confused, but we were actually in Chiang Mai, Thailand. If our website says Indonesia, please let me know.
No, that's my heart, my ear.
They're all in that part of the world, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a story that only God can do, honestly. I was a college kid that did not have much travel background, wasn't raised in a family that traveled, never entertained the thought of missions or Asia. If anything, I wanted to work for the consulate in France. That was always a dream that I had as a as a high schooler. And the school that we went to, Messiah College, had this program junior year where you could study abroad for the price of studying on campus. And so I had applied to, probably 15, 20 programs. For one reason or another, they all didn't work out. Colby, my then boyfriend, and I said, you know what, we just must not supposed to be studying abroad. There must be something that God has for us here. It was the last morning of registration. I don't remember what month it was. Doesn't really matter. But it was an 8:00 class. And this presenter came in for a study abroad program. And I was like, God, you're so cruel. How come you're like rubbing this in our face? We're not able to study abroad. And he started talking about Thailand, which I knew nothing about. And I started weeping. It was my 8:00 social work class. And it was such a move of the Spirit that Colby and I both left that class. And we were like, this is it. So we went to Thailand, and I am so thankful. We knew nothing about human trafficking there. And that was God's protection of my own heart. He totally knew I wouldn't have gone if I was fully aware. But once we got there, it's literally everywhere. You can't shy away from it. It's in the storefronts, it's at the markets, and God just started to highlight certain things. And so while other students definitely had this approach that they were just going to study abroad and go back home, God definitely was moving in a different way in our hearts. And so we saw things, got to intern a little bit, came back to the States, and God was like, I'm not done yet. Your story with Thailand isn't done yet. And so I went back senior year to respond, and which isn't a story in and of itself without Colby. And we decided we were going to get married and actually move there. And so we got married right out of college. 3 months later, Had my bridal shower, packed our boxes, went to Thailand, and called it home for 4 years.
Wow.
So feel free to dig into whatever part of that you want.
Yeah, no, that's a lot. No, I mean,
Yeah.
the culture shock of a place like Thailand. I think all I know about Thailand is from Somebody Feed Phil. So that's my limited knowledge on Thailand. If you've ever watched that show.
No, which one did you say?
Somebody Feed Phil. Have you ever seen that?
Oh, yeah. That's so funny. I've only seen an episode or two, but yeah.
I think we watched it a couple weeks ago and he was in Thailand. But so unpack sort of this not knowing fully as you walk into it. I thought that was interesting that you kind of had maybe a social and spiritual naivete that walking in, and then when you get there, eyes wide open to it everywhere. What's your response at that point? I mean, so junior in college, you're maybe 21, like zeal and passionate and also a little bit dumb. I've got them in my house. So
yeah. A little dumb and a little anxious, I'll be honest. I think for so many Americans, I don't think I was alone when you hear this conversation, which I think is why it doesn't happen enough. It makes you really uncomfortable, makes you feel a little bit unsafe, a little bit hopeless and helpless. And so I remember we were actually there. There's a very clear and obvious red light district. It's not hidden. It's just there. Very clear and obvious trade and sales and abuse and all of that stuff that you can't hide. But I remember telling the Lord, I was like, okay, I'm here. You got me here. I'm not going to call home and fly home tomorrow. I'm going to stick out these 3 months. Well, let me talk about my senior year. But I was like, okay, God, if you want me in the thick of these cases with these kids, because I was a social work student, if you want me down the streets of the red light district, you're going to have to, a move of heaven's going to have to happen, right? Because my anxiety was really getting to me. Just the unknown, I think. And I was at a birthday party with a bunch of my coworkers, my teammates, and a call came in. We worked very closely with the Thai government, and we had to respond to a case. I had no other way back home except to go with my team to the case to respond. And we were there. We were at the police station, the red light district, and there was this, oh my goodness, I can get like the chills thinking about it now. This just whisper of the Spirit that said, like, I'm with you. I'm going to strengthen you because I need you to get up and do it again tomorrow. And there was this shift that happened, like, you're safe. I brought you here. I'm with you. And we're going to do it again. And that really launched this confidence that I had to journey with Jesus through the rest of the 4 years that were ahead.
Yeah, I mean, 4 years is a long time. I mean,
yeah.
I think about it in college terms. 4 years is long, but it goes fast. Was it sort of the same way in Thailand that a day felt forever, but a year felt like a blink?
Yeah, I mean, yes, no, all of it. I think looking back, the friendships and the community that we had was so intense that it felt like we've known each other a lifetime, right? So much life happened that it felt like a lifetime. But also I'm like, oh my goodness, how are we back here already stateside, So life is just very different. I don't know if you've had people in the missions field like on your show before, but it's a very different dynamic life. Yeah.
I have a close friend who I can only label as a full-time short-term missionary. That's the best way I can describe him. He travels all over the world, probably 20, 25 trips a year for a week, 2 week, 3 week stretches to different, and he goes to other missionaries he knows to support them, give them some sabbatical leave or do projects there. And he shared with me the world is so different beyond the borders here. And no matter where you go, whether it's Thailand or you go to South America, like it makes you so grateful for what we have here in the States. But the world beyond the borders is just vastly different. What did you find? And
everything about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So what did you find? So you go and you had this sort of 3-month window as a junior, but then you go back for 4 years. Some of those differences, what were good about those differences? And then what was a struggle for you while you were there?
So I'm going to give an answer that first came to mind, but if you want me to go a different direction, feel free to prod and ask.
I want to hear your story.
So, I think any missionary, short-term, long-term, study abroad student, whatever, you go there with this thought in mind of what it's going to be like, right? And I don't even know if I could fully wrap my mind around what I thought then, just because so much life has happened. But I didn't know that it was going to be a season of my own heart work with the Lord. And I've heard of the missions fields that when you're in a foreign country, especially like Thailand or somewhere in Southeast Asia, all of your senses are on overdrive around the clock. And so what happens is there's this bubbling that happens in your heart of so much is on overload all the time. Stuff bubbles to the surface. And you have this choice to either kind of let it bubble and get ugly or to deal with it, almost like a refining, right? And there's this choice. And you can hear a lot of stories of missionaries burning out, or a lot of missionaries leaving the field, going home early because of this very thing, or people that dive into it. And I'm so thankful. So in Chiang Mai, Thailand, there were actually 2 counseling centers specifically for missionaries for when this happens. So it was a season where the Lord was like, listen, you don't want to go home. I know you're not going to leave. So why don't we embrace this season of everything coming to the surface, dealing with it, just you and me. And it was hard and unexpected, but really, really sweet. I think that if I wasn't there, some of this stuff would have never been dealt with, with me, with him, and my own heart. And so much growth and so much of my own story, honestly, with Gather, came from this very season. But yeah, I think it's...
I was going to ask
say it again.
If you thought... That's what I was going to ask, Kayty, that if you thought that the Lord sort of intentionally led you to Thailand to not just make a difference there, but to make a difference in who you were.
Yeah. I feel like that's a hard thing for certain people to hear, especially financial supporters. Yeah. That can land funny for people. That can land funny when you admit that. But I would say absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Especially when you look at human trafficking and the work being done in that field. None of it is instant gratification. It's kind of like the long road. Like everyone serves their time, plants their seeds, and then over time, change happens. Right. And so, yeah, God brought us there to sow a few seeds in that season, work on my heart, and then come back stateside.
So help me build a bridge between Kayty, the social work missionary, and Kayty, who becomes the queen of hospitality, essentially. And I know I love the biblical passage that says practice hospitality. But where did that begin for you? Did that begin in this time in Thailand?
So there's a few kind of like journeys that intersect here. The first one was talk about expectations that I had going into the field. I did not expect loneliness to be a huge part of our story. Especially I knew it's a hub of missions for Southeast Asia. There are a lot of foreigners there, a lot of people with similarities. I had been there before, all of these things. And I mean, surprise, surprise, 23-year-old newlyweds move halfway across the world from everyone they know. Of course, there's going to be loneliness. And so that was one part of it where we were like, oh my goodness, we're lonely. What are we going to do about it? And we felt an invitation from the Lord to respond. And your question was, how does that turn into hospitality, Kayty, right? So we started to invite over literally anyone we met. I was actually thinking before this conversation, there was a Mennonite missions community there as well. And I remember this one lady, I ran into her at the grocery store. We smiled at each other. And it was that smile where like, oh, we'd be friends. Like there's something, I don't know, we share there's a heart connection here. Yeah. And that woman and that invitation became a lifelong friend. So anyways, God was doing something here where he was showing me that there's power in an invitation, there's power in hospitality, and he wants to use it. And so I didn't know that's what he was doing at the time. My own hospitality skills were building as a newlywed and as someone living in Asia. But more specifically, what really switched, when the switch flipped or whatever, was there was a dream that I had, and God had never spoken to me in this way before, which makes me know for sure it was him. And so it was 2:00 in the morning, and before baby, I'm in the thick of newborn right now, but I was a very sound sleeper and woke up at 2 a.m. and just had this crazy visual, I guess, of me at the center of this huge gathering. And it almost looked like it was just kind of like endless, limitless. And he showed me that I was kind of like the one facilitating people getting back to that space. And I heard this whisper, it's called Gather. And I woke up the next morning and just started to process it with him. And he just showed me, you're going to use all of this. You're going to use all of these trial and errors, all of the success and failure, insecurities, realized insecurities overcome. And I guess what I know now is turn it into a brand to get people back to that space.
Yeah. And so what have you found? It's interesting. You point out something that I think is true no matter where your location is. 23, young and married, whether you're young and married or not, I feel like it's with college students as well, because their community has been so insulated to one space and then they scatter. And what we found in working with college students, when they graduate and go to life, they still struggle with the loneliness. Like it just shows up, at 24, because these best friends they've made in this season are no longer close. What was that like for you guys? And what was sort of Colby in your response? I mean, obviously you're having people over, but what was sort of the conversations for you guys in going, okay, we came here to do the Lord's work, but the loneliness is here. What are we going to do about it?
Yeah. I think it was the first time in my life that I was desperate for community. And I think what I realized, I didn't have family. I didn't have a mom to cook me dinner when I was feeling sick, or, how all those things come into play, a church to start a meal train, whatever, friends to invite you to a movie. And so I was desperate for it. Right. And I think I started to believe that, we're just desperate for community here because we're halfway across the world. Right. But what happened was I saw how rich the community was when it was built, when it was invested in, when it was a value in our life. And so when I came back to America, and I think we're going to get here a little later, so let me know if I'm jumping ahead, but I realized that people are desperate for community here. They just don't have the words to put to it, the realization, or the feeling of permission to step into it. Now, you were talking about college students leaving college feeling lonely. I think that this is actually, no one's at fault here. This is a cultural construct. I think that until you're 18, 22, there's a massive emphasis on creativity and community. Massive. It's a part of culture, the expectation of you as you go through life. And then once you graduate, it's like, nope, the switch was flipped. Your new focus, your new value, your new attention is for success and independence. And so I think until in our own family units and hearts and all of that, switch the values back to community, that loneliness is going to be rampant.
Yeah, I like that idea that it switches from community to success, because I think you're right. College fosters it so much, your dorm room, your clubs, your whatever you're part of, your fraternity, your sorority is fostering community constantly. Then you go into the world and you're almost thrown out into the world and go find your success. But you almost do it, I'm going to say in isolation, that's a little bit strong, but maybe almost do it alone, because what's been there is no longer there. I think the church needs to do a better job. I'm a local church guy. I think we have to do a better job creating community, realizing not everybody's in the church. Where do we begin in the hospitality piece? And you said you just started inviting everybody and anybody to your home in Thailand. I assume it's pretty much the same now. Where does somebody begin with that process? Where do you begin with just going, hey, I'm going to start inviting people into my life and into my space?
So I've been the new kid a lot in my life. And so I've had to overcome a lot of weird, I call it, like doing things.
Like how many times have you walked into a new school and they said, boys and girls, please welcome Kayty, and you're awkwardly pointed at and shown your desk? Yes.
Right.
I think it was like 13
many things
for
like
me.
that.
Yeah.
Or you have to ask the questions because you don't understand the systems and look a little bit. Anyways, I am so far past being stopped by things being weird, because I've realized on the other side of that, there's so many beautiful things. There's so much invitation, a lot of answers to our questions or our pain points. And so what I tell people is, in college, we meet our friends in our community because of proximity, and it's almost encouraged. There's like a whole system, a whole culture, right? In adulthood, it's a little bit less obvious. And so I feel like as I reflected on my life, how I met friends in all of my different communities and how I made friends when we came back to America, it's this concept. I think Jesus kind of models it with Zacchaeus, where there is this kind of like chemistry in a crowd of people where you're like, oh, wow, there's something with that person right there that I think we'd be friends. And the best way to understand that is kind of like with dating. There's a chemistry that you can't ignore, right? Mm-hmm. With some people more than other people. And I feel like this happens, well, I know this happens for us at the grocery store, at the gym, at your kids' play dates, at church, where there's this chemistry, but we just think it's weird to do anything with it. And so I've developed this concept of like blind friend dating, where I'll, again, I could take this a few directions, but the way I talk about most commonly is, if I'm new in a community, or if you're saying I'm wanting to pursue people for the first time, I identify 5 people, 10 people, and I'll shoot a text. I'll say, hey, you guys don't know each other. You know me a little bit. I wanted to create a gathering for us to get to know each other a little better, to meet new friends. And people love it. And when people say, oh, isn't that weird? Because I'm talking about this has happened literally with my bank teller, the girl that would run next to me on the treadmill at Orange Theory. People that it would make you cringe to think of inviting them. They're like, isn't that weird? Well, yeah, maybe a little bit because culture says it is. But when 9 out of 10 people say yes to my invitation, it shows me that it's actually not weird. It's necessary. And that people are waiting for that kind of boundary breaker.
So, and you've taken the lead, but maybe for our friends listening who are waiting, they need to be the one who quits waiting, and be the one who invites into their space, into their life. What we found, Rachel and I, my wife, and we have a lot of, again, she works at Lee University, so we have college students, and we have them in our home for a meal, club we sponsor, or just students, and they're amazed that we would open our house to them. Right. And it's not always charcuterie. Sometimes because you're feeding college students, you got to mass produce food. So it's tacos or spaghetti or something like that. Yeah. But they're always amazed that there's an open invitation into our home, and which is really into our life. Are you finding in these blind friend dates that people are overwhelmed or amazed that you would invite them into your space?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think it is not the norm in our culture right now for people to come into your home. Yeah. I think I heard a statistic once that if someone from another country lives in America for a period of time and goes back home, I think I need to look up the source of this to be able to quote it a little more confidently, but something like they could live in America for 5 to 10 years, go back to their home country and never be invited in someone's house. That broke my heart. And now I'm curious what the statistic is with just adults now, how often you're invited to people's homes. It's not the norm. And that's where depth of relationship happens. So yeah, it's a shock. I think that we are a generation, of course, with a loneliness epidemic, but also a generation waiting for an invitation. And what happens is if none of us go first, if all of us say, I'm just going to sit back and wait because I feel a little bit weird, then we're all left lonely, right? And so I think when a lot of us hear the concept of going first, sometimes it could feel like punishment. Sometimes it could feel cringy or like a heavy load, but I actually have totally reframed that. It's an honor. It is an honor, walking very closely with the heartbeat of Jesus to totally shift culture.
Yeah. And you bring up the Jesus point, and then again, as a pastor, if you read the Gospels and read them sort of through, what you find is a lot of what Jesus did was at tables. Yeah. A lot of the ministry that took place was over a meal. A lot of the weird. Zacchaeus. Yeah, I love Zacchaeus, but you have moments where it's like sinners and Pharisees at the same table, and and Zacchaeus is an example of that. And then you have moments where it's Jesus and his best friends at the table. There's a lot of things that happen biblically, and it was a cultural thing in the Hebrew culture to gather around food. It was a celebratory thing. It was a grieving thing that they were going to gather together and have a meal. And what I have found in my own life, and I'm sure you found this through this for blind friend dating, just your relationships, when you're at a table, there's something different that happens than when you're at a restaurant, when you're at your table. There's a capacity to relax, capacity to be open, capacity to be honest. What have been some of the things that have surprised you as you have brought perfect strangers together?
That's a really good question. I'll have to think on that a little bit more. I think one of the things that surprised me is how little structure needs to happen for people to feel a sense of belonging. It doesn't have to be perfectly curated. All of those tools help you to build confidence, help you to fill in gaps. Of course, I think that some of those tools are necessary, but I love when I have plans for a gathering, and I'm very detail oriented. So I have my schedule written and I just throw it out the window because connection happened without me. That's my favorite. Also, I think my favorite gatherings are when the diversity of age, race, gender, all of those things, the more diverse the gathering, the more comfortable I feel. I think that there is a richness that happens in that setting that is just so sweet. And our culture, unfortunately, has become so scared of inviting people that are different in many capacities. It's been something my husband and I actually say we miss being back in America because Thailand was such a melting pot, surprisingly. And there was so much learned and richness added to our table.
Yeah. Let's talk practicality. So if our friends are listening and maybe they're like, Kayty, I know how to make 3 things, right? And most of them are terrible. Or, I'm my best China is Chinette or whatever. Kind of give us maybe a step 1 or a starting point to creating an event, creating a gathering where we can make people feel welcome and practice this biblical hospitality.
It's great. So if you follow our brand and kind of more where I'm headed, so if you follow us over the course of the next few months, I talk a lot about the combination, the pillars of hospitality, food, design, and relationships. Now, I feel like there are 2 camps. There's the camp of people that are like, that's overwhelming. I'm just not going to think about it at all. House is a mess. Don't serve any food. Then there's the other side that totally idolizes it. And I think that hospitality culture right now idolizes design, idolizes perfect food. And we have to land somewhere in the middle. And here's why. I know that all of those things are tools to cultivate an atmosphere of belonging. And like we said, if you look in scripture, Jesus sat, there was food, right? There was food, there was a table, there were certain things in order that just help to cultivate an atmosphere. And so I want to encourage you listening. Every time I talk about food, anytime I talk about design, the goal is never perfection, it's intention. And so shifting the narrative from how does this make me look to how does this make you feel? You could still have that gorgeous couch that you want, but make sure that the pillows are comfortable, things like that. Make sure there's enough seating for everyone. So I guess now that we laid the groundwork, we could quickly go through each one. So for food, I think really take the pressure off yourself. I think old school, we'll call it entertaining, said that everything has to be presented perfectly and cooked from scratch. While that's a wonderful skill to have and will definitely give you confidence, that's not the standard. Like if you don't have time, takeout is fine. People need a table. They don't need perfect food. But with that, I do think that cooking is all throughout the Bible. God, he loved food. He talks about food a lot. I think he wants us to have confidence exploring that. And so don't wait until the night before people come over to try your new recipes. My husband and I kind of have this new goal in our house to try a new recipe a week or a month and build our confidence over time. So it's more of a lifestyle instead of a last minute stressor. And find your things that are pantry staples. I talk a lot about this, the bruschetta toppings at Trader Joe's. I always have those in my pantry. They're a little bit elevated flavor wise, very impressive when you pull them out, but they're not perishable. And I take those out with crackers or bread, and it's a quick gathering. So that's food, and we could dive into any of these further because I love talking about all of them. When it comes to design in your space, I think that there are a few foundational things that everyone should have that are not expensive. They're just intentional. And the first one is making sure that there's physical space for people. And now this sounds so silly, but even if you live in a tight space, that's fine. Make sure you have some kind of poofs or pillows for everyone to land, because we've all been there. We're at a gathering. There's nowhere for us to settle, no tabletops, no seats. And so you feel itchy and you leave early. Making sure that there's physical space, having some source of music, whether it's an Alexa or a Google Dot. Music fills in a lot of silence and it makes people feel very comfortable. It sets the tone without words. And so making sure there's music in the room that you want to gather in. 2 sources of lighting, dim and bright. Again, it's a way to guide the energy of a gathering without much effort. And fragrance. Fragrance can hide a lot of cleaning that wasn't done or make the room appear a particular way. There's something about the appearance of cleanliness that makes people feel comfortable. And so again, I'm not saying I expect you to scrub your floors with a toothbrush before guests come over, but just have a fresh scent. Open your windows, fresh scents. That's kind of my foundation of design that I teach. And then when it comes to relationships, I think that one of the keys to preparing for a gathering as a new home is committing to break past small talk. And small talk is a massive problem in our culture right now. We lack the confidence and I guess the skills to know how to work past that. And I'm so thankful for a community in Thailand that were good question askers because they modeled this for me. So this was something that I learned from it being shown to me. And the key to keep in mind is to be curious but not nosy. And there's a massive difference. We can all think of it, someone in our life that's asking you a question and you're like, oh my goodness, I know you're asking this to spread it, right? Like, I know you're asking this to spread it or because you're trying to build a case of, there's so many different motives. But if you're curious, there's a authenticity, a vulnerability, a sense of connection that happens. And so what this looks like is, say we're, I don't know, you mentioned earlier that you're a local church guy. And I'll say, what church do you go to? What's your role there? Do you have community there? Are you involved in a small group? You pick out a point that you could tell is important to someone, positive or negative, parents' illness or a hobby. And you just dive a little bit deeper into that, and that it's amazing how known people feel when you go down that road. So
have you found that in this asking questions, this be curious but not nosy, that people are receptive to sharing themselves? Because really, anytime you start to ask questions beyond where do you work and where do your kids go to school and those small talk questions, which we all ask and kind of look for kind of connecting points, are people at a place where again, we talked about it, it's a lonely generation, they're waiting to be invited. Are they taking that conversational invitation to open up to people? Or are they still kind of stand backish a little bit?
So I used to get very discouraged. I think that my first few years back from Thailand, moving back here, were lonely. Because again, I had this, I'll call it intense community. We were very desperate for each other. We needed each other, to show up in our lives quickly. And there was it just was a sped up version of friendship. Mm-hmm. And I came back here and I was like, wow, I don't have that same intentionality, the same depth and question asking, right? And so I was like, I'm never going to get it. But I saw that it just required a little bit of modeling. And what I mean is like taking that model that I was shown there, and it became a monkey see, monkey do effect here. And so the more I asked questions, the more I showed up honestly when people asked me questions. I saw that over time, oh wow, the relationship is really taking shape. It's really changing. It just takes a little bit more time.
Yeah. I think culturally, I want to ask this correctly. I think culturally we want to be in relationship. We just don't really know how. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Yes.
Or we've had maybe moments, you talk about somebody being nosy and looking to build a case or whatever. We've had sort of wounds happen in relationships, so we're
Mhm.
very guarded. I think
Yeah.
even the church, I think there's such a guard up that I don't want people to see me.
Yeah.
I don't want to. I
Mhm.
don't want to be vulnerable. I want to be known, but I don't really want to do the work to be known. Um,
Yeah.
how has, and again, you talked about the three pillars: food, design, relationship. I know from a church standpoint, one of the big introductions of coffee was people feel less awkward holding something in their hand. That's why we have bulletins as well.
Yes.
How have these
Mhm.
pillars, the food, design, and relationship pieces, sort of softened the environment or made it where people feel like they can really share themselves?
Hmm. I'm going to flip the script on this just a
Yeah.
little bit because I actually feel like one of the reasons hospitality is difficult for us right now is because of insecurity in those spaces.
Mm.
Yeah. So I
So
think
as
that
a
once, okay,
host
so
or
the reason I'm
as the
so
guest?
host.
Okay.
Yeah. What route were you going
No, no,
down?
no. I
Host
just
or
wanted to clarify
guest?
so I understood
Guest?
your answer. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. So I think that that's kind of where there's a crippling happening in culture right now, where it's like, remind me, you said how those soften the atmosphere, right?
Yeah, because I think people come in
Yeah,
guarded no matter what they do, or even when you're the
yeah,
host, you're a little bit like, will they like my food? Will they like my space? Will they criticize my wonky
yeah.
door? Whatever it is.
Yeah, I think, huh? That's a really good question. I think that those definitely can soften when they're used intentionally. They can also cripple a host when the intention is off, when the
Hmm.
goal is perfection instead of intention, right? Um, yeah. I mean, feel free to. I'm trying to take that a different direction, but
No,
I
I
don't know.
think
Yeah,
let me
I'll have
ask
to
it a
think on
different
that one a
way.
little bit more.
Let me ask it a different
Yeah.
way. I think in what I've just from tracking with you and from the little bit of conversation we've had,
Hmm.
the end result is people building relationships, people
Yeah. Yeah.
connecting, people having true authentic friendships, which is so significant. How do we one, create a space that's going to help us deliver that, and how do people who may be coming in with some reservations
Hmm.
feel like they can open up in a space?
Okay, so let's start with the first part. The first part was how do we
Yeah,
create
how do
that? How
we
do
as
we
the
work
host, let's
towards
talk,
that?
let's put the host hat on
Yeah.
first. How do we as the host
Yeah.
set up a space where people will be able to put their guard down?
Mm. Okay, so a few different directions here. The first one, we've talked a little bit about this in the last few minutes, but I say the hard work of heart work is honestly the missing key for a lot of us, especially in the church. I find that the church actually does have like a natural hospitality undertone, right? A lot of believers, when they take the Enneagram, a lot of women in the
Hmm.
church end up a 4 because they're naturally helpers. They want to serve, they want to help, right? And so there is that natural hospitality undertone. I lost my train of thought for just a second. Had to bring up the Enneagram. I wasn't going to
No,
go
I'm
there.
an
And it threw
Enneagram.
me
I'm
off.
an Enneagram 2. So Enneagram 2, I'm a helper.
Are you? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Very rare. A
But
2-wing 3. So I'm very odd in that. Yeah.
I'm a 3-wing too. Oh my goodness, I totally lost that train of thought. But what I was going to say was, so there's those memes on social media where you could see a mom half hour before guests come over, flipping the couch, throwing things out the window. We've all seen those and laugh at them, right? I think we have to make this a lifestyle shift instead of just a one-time event. And
Okay.
oh, okay. Hard work of heart work. I'll go back there in a second. But we have to agree to make this a lifestyle shift, a whole value shift in our family culture, in our own personal lives. And what I mean by that is looking at your schedule and actually creating margin for hospitality. If we just keep operating in the hustle and the hurry and the success and the independence, there's never going to be natural time. And so I remember a fellow CEO friend of mine said that it was, I think, encouraged to her that she carve out 1 or 2 days a month, and she has to treat that time like a board meeting that she's going to get fired if she doesn't attend. And those are her hospitality times. She has to gather with someone. She has to host something during those times. And then also, I think that's huge for a lot of us, especially entrepreneurs and in ministry. Also, like I said, allowing ourselves to be creative with food, giving yourself the permission to try food, try new recipes. I think I lost my train of thought and I lost the original question. Oh my goodness.
You're on track. No, I mean,
the hard work.
Yeah. The hard work of heart work.
Yeah. The hard work of heart work. That's what I was going to go to. I should have given the disclaimer at the beginning. We're still in the no sleep days of
awesome.
Of bringing home baby, best kid in the world.
You eventually get some more sleep. You do. It just all of it changes. We can talk parenting down the road, but yeah, it changes. Brain function
starts to get a little questionable. So the hard work of heart work. That's what I was going to say. So many believers are actually have this like natural gifting, and we keep running into a wall, and we're like, how come I keep hitting this wall with relationship, with hospitality? And there's this heart work piece that we keep avoiding. But when that's dealt with, so much opens up. A huge part of my story was I was bullied pretty seriously through middle school and high school. And I found it crippling to accept an invitation. And I almost sabotaged relationships before they even happened. And so after a few years, I was like, man, why are all these relationships burning? And I was like, oh, common denominator is me. And I have to start dealing with this. And on the other side of this counseling that happened in Thailand, this beautiful, messy season, I found a richness in friendships and my own hospitality. And so I think for a lot of believers listening that want to take this to the next level, or kind of trying to name the wall they keep hitting, it might just be some of that heart work.
Yeah. Let's talk about the other side of it. As somebody comes in as a guest to your gathering, always going to be fear, right? A little bit of fear, a little bit of anxiety, unless they're just a woo or a maybe just an extra extrovert. Maybe they're ready to go and want to meet new people, but most of us are not that way. How are you establishing space where they can come in, or how are you maybe preparing the groundwork where they can come in and trust that they can be known in that space and it's safe?
Yeah. So, goodness. So I am at the very, very early stages of writing a book on the topic.
Oh, awesome.
And I remember one of the first conversations that the book agent said was, there's just one rule throughout this whole process, starting now. You're not allowed to use the word entertaining. And she said that there's this shift in culture that people don't want to be entertained. They want to be hosted. And this is something that I'm still grappling with, wrestling with, trying to figure out if maybe a new word needs to be born about this whole, shift in culture.
Yeah.
But it's true. People don't want to be entertained. They want to belong. They want to be included. And so I often tell the host, people don't want to be a slave to their seat. They don't want to sit in their seat while you serve them everything from start to finish. They want to be involved. And so one of the best ways to actually take stress off of you, but more importantly, to make people feel belonging, is to invite them in the whole process. And so when they come, I mean, these are things that, again, people might see as weird, might make you cringe a little bit. Ask someone to take the trash out. Ask someone to toss the pasta. Ask someone to get the creamer out of the fridge and put it on the table. All of these things that we have been told, the role of the host is this. I think a shift is happening and needs to happen. And that makes people maybe cringe at first because it's new, but very quickly feel a sense of ownership in this in the space.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's not that you're avoiding work. It's that you're inviting people into it with you.
Yeah.
I think I went to Kentucky. I didn't go to the Kentucky Derby, but I lived in Kentucky for a while, and I went to a Kentucky Derby like party at a place, right? And you had to keep your coat on, had to stay pretty much in your seat unless you were betting. It was a very, very sophisticated event, right? And I remember the whole time being very uncomfortable. Like none of it was comfortable.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying with asking people to participate in the process is making them comfortable with what's happening there. They're not just a guest that I love the shift, entertaining, but somebody you're inviting in to life with.
Yeah.
I invite you into my
people
home.
don't want a dinner party.
No, go ahead. Yeah, they don't want a dinner party. That's
great. People don't want
a
dinner party. Oh, sorry.
I love that. No, that's
sorry. Say that last part one more.
No, you perfectly said it. They don't want a dinner party. They want
people
friends. They want life.
Go ahead.
No, I was just completing the thought.
I know, and that's the shift that's happening, and I think that makes people a little uneasy and uncertain. But with these little things, these little tweaks, like inviting people into the process, you become very quick family. You become very quick community when you invite people into that. And I think also, I asked my community a while ago, like, where do you learn hospitality from? As a culture that doesn't come to the table, where are you learning? Where are you learning? And people didn't have a lot of answers. And so I think by inviting people into the process, I've talked in this conversation a few times about how things were modeled to me and how my life changed. If we are inviting people into the process, we're modeling a new norm.
Yeah.
And that's a teaching opportunity too.
Yeah, I love that. I love what you're doing. Just, I think... I'm going to share my current pet peeve, right? And it's a cultural pet peeve, is when I am driving down the road and I see people eating food in their car. Like,
okay,
I know McDonald's is making a lot of money and Chick-fil-A is making a lot of money doing this, but I just have got to a place in my life of going like, I don't think that was God's design, that we are just eating alone on the go, semi-enjoyable food, but not really, just to keep going to the next thing. I think part of this hospitality conversation that's challenging for us in America especially is this ability to slow down and take the time to eat and to gather. How can we convince somebody they have the 2 hours or whatever it's going to be to come gather? That it's actually good for their soul, like more than a dinner party. It's going to be good for their soul. What's sort of the invitation to go, hey, this is not just good food, it's going to be good for your soul.
Yeah. Goodness. So there's not a great answer to this, because I would say you don't know how life-changing it is until you've experienced it. And when you experience that community, it's like nothing else in life matters, right? Like, I think when I experienced this in Chiang Mai, I was like, man, this is the model for the rest of my life. And it was because it was shown to me. And so I guess two answers that neither are wonderful, but the first one would be to take my word for it. And to take my word for it, this kind of like New England girl that was addicted to the hustle and a workaholic and all of those things. Life totally changed when I experienced community. Take my word for it. The second would be, if you're still a little bit skeptical, do me a favor, give yourself, we're a culture that loves goals, loves, setting intentions for the year and all of those things. Give yourself 6 months. Give yourself 6 months of that 1 day a month, 2 days a month, where you have to pursue community and start applying some of these things and watch the shift. Watch the shift. Yeah.
I want to bring our conversation full circle a little bit, because I know the Lord doesn't undo things he does. So there's probably a piece of your heart that's still in Chiang Mai and with the people of Chiang Mai. How are Kayty and Colby and maybe even Gather still connected, or maybe serving, doing what they can for the people of Chiang Mai?
Yeah, so a lot of us, personally, business-wise, we're in a huge season of transition and shift. The pandemic was actually amazing for our business. After pandemic is when things got, forced change and things like that. And so we're kind of figuring out next steps. But a huge part of when I birthed Gather was to fund the nonprofit that we worked with in Chiang Mai. It's a life skill training program, aftercare program for victims of trafficking, reentering society. And so it's not something that we are currently doing, but it's a goal of ours to be able to fully fund that project. We have not been back. We are hoping for a trip early next year. COVID restrictions were very strict. And then we had a baby. So we're just talking about getting back. But I think one thing I would love to encourage listeners with is we found that there are not enough conversations happening in the church about trafficking or culture. It's very uncomfortable. We're scared to have them, rightfully so. And so if anyone listening wants to expand on this conversation, ask questions, I would love to be a safe place for that. So feel free to reach out with any questions on trafficking, nonprofit world, missions, any of it. I'd love to keep that going.
An organization that we are fans of and supported previously is A21 with Christine Kane.
Yeah.
And they do a lot of great work in this area. Connect with Kayty and Colby. Definitely. It is an uncomfortable conversation we probably need to have on this trafficking issue.
Well said. Yeah.
Kayty, you've been great. There's so many tidbits of information that are both good for our soul and hopefully good for our next gathering. We appreciate it. One final question I ask every guest that comes on the show. Since the show is titled The Collective's Conversation, who is one person, historical, present day, fictional, or in real life, that you would want to sit down and have a conversation with?
So this is a fun fact about me. I actually have a list on my phone of people that are living that I want to be able to interview. And I won't be a rule breaker. I won't tell you the whole list. But if I were to pick one person,
I got all day.
I can. Okay.
Yeah, tell me.
There's
maybe a top three. A top four. Perfect.
Okay. I have a top four. So the first one, this always surprises people, is Simon Cowell. He fascinates me. He is one of the most fascinating people to me. And I don't know if you guys have watched him. So he's become a believer over the last few years. And there has been such a massive shift in just his presence, his demeanor, his conversations with people, the way that he encourages and invests. And I want to hear his story. And he made a heartbreaking statement to Terry Crews live on America's Got Talent. And I just want to dive into that deeper with him.
I think Terry's a believer too, right? Is that true? Terry Crews is a believer? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm curious how that all happened. But then Meghan Markle, Joanna Gaines, and Martha Stewart.
Okay. So Meghan Markle as royalty or as the Suits star? Because Suits was one of my favorite shows.
Yeah. And were you watching it in live time when they started dating, like when that all was happening in real time?
No, I got in it late and we binge watched it during like last year maybe. So
I remember, we were watching it when it was coming out, like episode by episode. And I remember the word got out that they were dating. And my first thought was, oh no, what's going to happen to the show? So selfish.
Yeah, because it was a great show. So
awesome. It was wonderful.
Those are incredible people to have conversations with. So if any of our friends are listening can make that happen, get on it. Get her with the princess. And let's see what we can do. Kayty, thank you for your time. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for the tips on how we can be better hosts, and not just that, but how we can create spaces where people belong. Appreciate it. As we always say here at the Collective's Conversations, you've got a seat at the table. Thanks for coming on.
I love it. Thanks so much, guys. Stay in touch.
Okay, so the recording should end. It should. Hang on. Why is it not ending?
Encore.
Wow, what a great conversation that was. Thanks for joining us in the conversation. If something from the conversation really stood out to you, would you share it and tag me on social media at Jeff_Pitts_ on Instagram? And we would love it if you would rate and review and subscribe to the show. That just helps us reach more people with these great conversations. And as we always say, you've got a seat at the table. Thanks for joining the conversation.